Welcome to In Touch. I'm Lucy Saunders. This is a picture of a picnic taking place at the turn of the century. And as always, with pictures of this vintage, it means my guest today is David Rodich, Wadsworth historian. Hi, David.
Hello.
Now, we're talking about a picnic for a very special reason.
Well, with having just come through summer, I thought it'd be interesting to take a look back and see some of the ways that Wadsworth people spent their summers in years past and
Cool down?
cooled down, got through the hot weather.
Okay. You want to elaborate a little bit on the picture that we just saw?
Well, as we've talked previously, from the founding of Wadsworth to the end of the Civil War, there was really not much activity of recreational nature going on in Wadsworth. Primarily, people were busy setting up their businesses, opening up their farms, raising their families, and breaking through the wilderness. But with the end of the Civil War and people began to achieve a certain degree of prosperity, they looked towards ways that they could spend their leisure hours, few though they may have been. And one of the solutions to this, especially after the coming of the railroad, was a community picnic. And on a given day each year, the entire community would pack up, businesses would shut down, stores would close, the factories would suspend operations, and everyone would pack a picnic basket or hamper and board an excursion train for Cedar Point or Silver Lake or one of the other recreational areas in this part of Ohio. And it was an opportunity for them to relax and spend time, sometimes with neighbors that they barely had a chance to be with because of their work schedules. I
just wanted to say that, if we get another shot of this picture, that these are all picnic baskets here, waiting to be tucked away in the train.
I'm sorry, perhaps we should point out, this is taken early in the morning at the depot. You can see out of the corner of the picture the water tower down there, which was used to fill the steam engines. Behind this crowd of gentlemen in the background is an old boxcar. In the Wadsworth Depot, the original one burned down in 1893, and there was an argument between the railroad and the state of Ohio as to who was responsible for building us a new one. And this was evidently before the days of binding arbitration, because it wasn't until 1899 that the state finally relented and built us another one. So to shame them into reaching a decision, the citizens took this old dilapidated boxcar and pulled it up along the siding and used it as a temporary depot until that time. The building behind it was along what was called Depot Street, a street that no longer exists. And it was a large building that was used as a rooming house or a hotel in those days.
Very nice.
Now, we had talked about some of the pastimes that people had back then, and about the only activity that was really open to them was swimming to get out of the heat. And we had a law that was passed in March of 1883 regulating exposed bathing, because this came to be quite a problem in the community. Anytime there was a little pool of water, people were, men and women, boys and girls, were stripping off their clothes and going swimming. And so they had to regulate that whoever after sunrise or before dark of any day shall in an unclothed and naked condition go into or bathe in any open waters within said village to the annoyance of anyone or the public shall be fined in any sum not exceeding $5 at the discretion of the mayor. Apparently, if nobody complained, it was all right to do it. But if you annoyed anybody, you were in trouble.
What book were you reading out of?
These are the ordinances of the City of Wadsworth, the codified ordinances, the general ordinances, I should say. This is an 1894 edition when they were assembled. And water, I know several people who nowadays on a hot day will go and fill a bathtub with cold water and perhaps put some ice cubes in and sit in there and relax. And people in those days did not have that luxury. Oftentimes in old movies we've seen the little round copper bathtub, and you could hardly get your whole body in that. And even if you could, you wouldn't have the cold water available to you. In a booklet from the Wadsworth Light and Water Company that was published at the turn of the century, it listed the rules and regulations for people who availed themselves of the city water system. And it's interesting to me that they didn't charge a standard rate for all homes and businesses. They broke this down for banks or bakeries or barber shops or blacksmith shops. They even have a subdivision for photographic galleries. And at that time, our photographer, Captain T.D. Woolbaugh, who we've talked about many times, was the only photographer in Wadsworth, but apparently they found it necessary to make a separate
category?
Category for him, and in fact, he didn't have running water in his studio.
Oh,
he
you're
carried
kidding.
it from the pump, and sometimes when it froze up from home, and would carry it all the way from his home on High Street in buckets. But water was an expensive commodity at that time when it was available. So people had to avail themselves of these public swimming areas.
And I know, of course, the ice box was very popular at that time, where you would buy a block of ice and put it...
Well, quite often, nowadays, people will search out old wooden ice boxes that were discarded previously and put them in their home and fill them with flowers or for any one of a number of uses. But very few people would think of buying one of these antiques and putting it in their home to replace their modern-day refrigerator, not only because it's not as large, but also because of the inconvenience of it. And there are still people in Wadsworth who can remember the Iceman coming with a block of ice and would use a set of tongs similar to these, which...
You've gotten in there really well. I can't get this out. Oh, there we go.
Came from the Henry Coal and Ice Company, which was originally in Barberton, but they opened a branch here in Wadsworth. In fact, we talked about the utilities, the Wadsworth Light and Water Company, which was a private company, but it was in 1917, under Mayor Boyer's administration, the utilities were purchased by the village and were operated by them. And things were going so successfully that they decided to build an ice house to provide the people with this. Previous to this time, ice for the community was cut from the ponds, particularly the Trump ponds, which we call the Schaefer ponds, up off of North Street. And these would be stored in the wintertime and then used during the summertime. They'd be stored in...
How would they store them? I always wondered.
Well, they built specially insulated ice houses and then pack the ice in sawdust.
Oh, okay.
And obviously some of it would melt, but it would keep it fairly well if they were able to cut enough of it so that they would have enough to last them through the summer season. Also, after the racetrack was built in the 1890s, they would take ice from the center of the racetrack when it froze in the winter time. In the Henry Coal and Ice and the Freed Brothers Coal and Ice Company were quite active in Wadsworth during those years. Now, eventually, after the city built their own ice house, it ceased to run profitably, and they eventually sold their equipment out to the Henry Coal and Ice, which, as I said, operated an establishment across the side. This is one of theirs from Barberton and Wadsworth.
Henry Coal and Ice Company, Barberton. Okay. Now, I accidentally knocked a thermometer off here. Let me just go reach it.
People say today, as they probably said 100 years ago, someone asked them, what does a thermometer say? And they say, what difference does it make? It's hot.
It's hot.
And they probably had that same reply 100 years ago. But they did have thermometers in those years. The one that you're holding up now is a wall-mounted type thermometer from the J.W. Gerber and Son, Wadsworth. And that's of a more recent vintage. You notice it has a little dial in the center, a little disc, and that disc changes colors dependent upon what the weather condition is supposed to be.
Does it tell you, oh, light blue is fair,
And that says
pinkish blue,
and that's supposed to be
pink,
rain.
and it's supposed to rain?
It's supposed to rain.
Okay. Let's look at some other earlier ones. I'll just start here with... Okay.
This is one from the Wadsworth Savings and Trust Company, which was the forerunner of the Citizens Bank and the predecessor of Bank One that we remember.
Okay. This is a...
One from the First National Bank of Wadsworth, which is now Huntington Bank.
Did they give these out to people who opened accounts, or were these pretty much freebies, or?
I would imagine in that day and age they were probably giveaways, because I don't think that premiums, as we think about it, really existed to that large an extent that you open an account and you get something.
You get a toaster or whatever.
Another one from John W. Gerber, but rather than a wall-mounted one, this is more like a little picture.
Yeah, this is really pretty. It's got some really nice colors. Hunting dogs.
There's a thermometer up in the corner. And that's the type of thing you could use year after year, whereas a calendar After the
Exactly.
dates are gone, you might throw them away, but these would be kept indefinitely. This is one from the Clark's Corners service station.
Yeah, it's got a nice
Clark's
scene on
Corners,
it, too.
which was run by Mike Ernest. That's a very nice little home
Colors
scene.
are really pretty.
And this is from the Allen Hartzell and Dibble Company. Allen Hartzell and Dibble, which of course is our oldest continuing business in Wadsworth from 1875, put out quite a number of different thermometers and calendars and really made it quite nice for the collector. Give it a little variety. Always find something different.
Yeah.
Now that one might go nice in a grandmother's home because it's kind of a pastoral picture there. And the next one might go in the young man's room. Of course, you see the planes flying up at the top and the girl with her skirt blowing up, not unlike Marilyn Monroe's famous picture. And the title of that mirror is Tailwind. But that's also a collectible from the Allen Hartzell Dibble Company.
It does have a working thermometer in it, though, to
Yes.
its credit here. And
Where
we're
its position there, I'm surprised it hasn't gone up a little bit. Now this is another one from Allen Hartzell Dibble, but it's a desk model, and it also contains a calendar on the side, which can be pulled out so that the dates can be removed. This is from 1943.
Is it pulled out from the side here? I don't want to do that. I
Right.
don't want to rip anything. But
It pulls out from the
Like
side,
that
you
here.
could tear off the pages and then insert it, return it to the calendar, to the frame, and then you could actually change it from year to year, so it's almost a perpetual calendar.
Right, and it's made very durably. This is, not cardboard. This is metal.
And of course, the idea of a desk calendar continues with
Yes.
us today.
Even
This
now.
is obviously a much more recent one, and unfortunately, the temperature there, it says 76, might give a false impression as to how warm it is.
It is a hot under the lights. It's more than-
We're fortunate that we have the air conditioning, but that is a gift from the Wadsworth Rotary Club, and it's the one, in fact, that I use at home.
I want to hold this one up again because we weren't able to get this shot. But this is the one we first started with that's wall-mounted with these brackets and has the color here that changes.
Now, as we've talked before, I am not able, since I do this on my own, to have all of the equipment and techniques that I really should to preserve all of these items. And you can buy some very sophisticated temperature control and humidity control devices. Well, I do the best I can, but one of the things that I use in the room where all these items are stored is this barometer to help me keep track of the temperature and the humidity. And I do have a few other, a little more modern devices, but I took
kind of
that off the
charming,
wall
though.
today to bring that along.
To be able to use this one.
And this is one that I doubt that we would even be able to see on camera, unfortunately. I was at a sale several years ago, and everything had been just about sold, and I noticed that one tacked up in a garage, and I asked them about selling it. And it's, you can see up top it says Fleet Wing, and it's the Nicodemus Oil Company in Wadsworth, Ohio. Now, something like that can be professionally restored because there's enough of the original remaining that people who are talented in that field are able to do it. One man who does that type of thing in Wadsworth is Walt Neal, who's the retired cartoonist from the Beacon Journal. And as a pastime or a sideline, he's able to take old toys and old metal advertising signs and things like that, and because of his artistic talents is able to restore that. But that's just one that I haven't done anything else with.
100 people, I'm sure, overlook that. You have a good eye.
Now, we talk so often about how little things can help us determine history. Now, we saw some items, an ice pick from the Freed Brothers Ice Company, but we don't know exactly when that was in existence. But then I happened to run across a pencil that says Compliments of Freed Brothers, dealers in ice and feed of all kinds, Wadsworth, Ohio. But you notice someone up in the corner has carved the year 1919. So it helps give you an idea that this little pencil that might be thrown away and think it's of no value helps to pinpoint the age. It gives you an idea where to start looking for information about that, where you might place it.
So you're a detective, too.
And of course, if you're going to go on a picnic, you need a bottle opener.
Exactly.
And this is one from the Spot Cafe,
Okay, it says the spot here.
which was Spot. which was down on College Street, and it has a wooden handle on it. This is one from Heiberger's, which will be familiar to many people as a longtime grocery in South Wadsworth.
So this is a plastic handle, right? Or
It may be plastic, yes.
feels plastic. It doesn't feel like wood.
It's not wood, that I'm sure. And this is one from Jack Summer Chevrolet. And the thing that what I would assume from that is the idea of going on a picnic. Take that along.
Yep.
Buy a car and go on a picnic. Perhaps
Exactly.
a station wagon, Chevrolet station wagon. And unfortunately, not everyone's able to get out into the water to cool off. And before the days of air conditioning, there was one means of keeping cool if you had to stay at home, and that was the hand fan. And they were given out in a variety of decorative styles. Most often, I just happened to watch a few days ago the movie Inherit the Wind, which is one of my favorite movies, and they were all using the fans from the funeral homes. And in fact, it was the funeral homes who put out most of the fans. This is one from
Finefrock?
Finnefrock.
Finnefrock, I'm sorry.
I didn't want to say, I couldn't see the back of it. That was my guess. This is from H.R. Finnefrock. The name should be familiar to modern-day residents as a funeral home in Canal Fulton area, and also I believe they have one in Massillon. But that's a tradition in their family. But Howard Finnefrock operated a furniture store and funeral home here in Wadsworth for a number of years, and this is one that was given out by his establishment.
On the back it has a phone number, which is 575.
Now this is a very old one, W.L. Good. You're not giving me hints on anything.
No, I'm not. You've done many things to me, David. This is my day to get even, I think.
All I can see is the front of it, I'm guessing.
Very good.
W.L. Good, who began in 1905 in a wallpaper store in Wadsworth, and later joined into business with Will Opplinger, who was an undertaker. And then when Mr. Opplinger retired from the business, Mr. Good continued for a short time on his own before entering into partnership with Galen Bixler. And it was known as Good and Bixler from that time. Now this, if you read what it says on the back of there, he's still selling his art goods and wallpaper and sewing machines, but he also does undertaking and sells auto equipment on the side, because you had to make a dollar where you could. And the fact that he is not in business with Opplinger, who died in 1921, and is not joined with Good yet in 1919. It has to be during that transition time, so this would be about 1916, 1917 probably.
There's a sweet picture of a little girl. Okay, do you need to...
This is one from the, I guess you would say from the 30s. It looks more of that style. It's compliments of Brenneman's Pharmacy, prescription druggists, and they're advertising Putnam Fadeless Dyes and Tints. And this is the type of thing where a company, a manufacturer would send out the stock card, and then the individual business would imprint their name or logo with it, so that they would, the same way today a local store that's part of a large chain would not print up their own advertising. Their main store sends out the advertising, and then they put their local name and address.
And was this just in the store for people to take?
I would guess, yes. They probably just gave them away.
Okay.
Now this is one of the more durable of them. Unfortunately, some of the paper ones that we've looked at just now are starting to deteriorate despite the best care. But now this one's a little more durable. It's from J.B. Hilliard & Son, Funeral Directors, and presented for your comfort.
Okay.
And it holds up much better.
Well, maybe we'll do the back first. I don't want to make you angry at me for fear you'll ask me something.
Fan yourself and keep cool. Compliments of Rain's Grocery. Quality groceries, fruits, and vegetables. And Bassett Rain had grocery stores both here and in Seville, and was quite a prominent businessman and civic leader in Wadsworth during his years here. And that's a little family admiring their new child. And it looks to be from the 20s, I would guess, just from the style of it.
So food for the whole family, right?
Now, we saw the one earlier of just Bill Good alone. But now this is Good and Bixler. Funeral directors, wallpaper, and white sewing machines. We had another undertaker in town just after the turn of the century. His name was Clare Pond, who is a member of the Pond family from River Styx. And his advertisements were undertaking and picture framing. You always had to have a side business to hang on there. And of course, people think of furniture dealers and undertaking being such a strange combination, but of course, in the early days, the cabinet makers, the people who made the furniture, were the same ones who were called upon to make the coffins. So they had to have a sideline. This is another one from Good and Bixler, wallpaper, art goods, and again, the white sewing machines.
How long would you say it's taken you to collect these? Is this
It's been an ongoing thing. Sometimes you can get several in one trip, and other times it's just piece by piece. Now this is one from All and Bowers, who were the successors to Weideman Brothers in Wadsworth, that had a grocery here at one time. And then Bowers retired from the firm, and Merlaw continued on his own for a number of years thereafter. And then in the 1930s, Bill Good retired from the funeral business, and Galen Bixler began in his own funeral home, carried on the firm from his home at 114 Lincoln Place. We have to remember also that in those years, prior to the First World War, and really almost until the Second World War in some cases, funerals were generally conducted from the home of the deceased. And it was very, very seldom that the undertaker would ever have to provide a place for a funeral. So that's why Mr. Bixler was able to conduct the embalming business from his family home on Lincoln Place. And of course, then his son, Charles Bixler, took over the firm and continued to operate it until his retirement in 1976.
Now, are you always on the lookout for items like these? If somebody who's watching perhaps has some items that they don't know what to do with, would you be interested?
Always, because so often the things that we show here are not things that are intrinsically valuable, but they can help us, they can provide such a wealth of information, just as my example of the little pencil, which is not worth anything, but it could really save a lot of time and research and help pinpoint something. Now, we talked about the things like the ice picks and the ice tongs that will help keep us cool and refrigerate our food in those days. And that's why the ladies always went to the grocery every day, of course, because they had such a small amount of ice. We talked about the thermometers that let us know how hot we are, the fans that try to alleviate it, the bottle caps that quench our bottle cap openers that quench our thirst. But unfortunately, there's something that comes along with summer.
I may take these home.
Well, you know, we can't keep one in the house that has an advertising on, because I keep taking them and putting them away. But these are fly swatters. This one's from Plank Elevator here in Wadsworth, the grain elevator that was located in the old carriage works on Mills Street in Wadsworth. I saw something the other day in the paper, and I don't recall what it referred to, but they referred to it again as Mill Street. And the street that runs opposite the Central Middle School is Mills Street,
with an F.
named for the Mills family. Mill Road, named after the mills that ground flour and made other things of that nature, was what we would now call State Street, and it ran alongside, diagonally off Main Street from the Matchworks, but people continuously do that.
They drop that down.
Now this is a fly swatter from the Wadsworth Oil Company. Now this was started by a man named Nichter on North Pardee Street, and eventually he sold out the business to Oscar Nicodemus, and he operated from a little rectangular building on the corner of Pardee and College Street. And then in 1936, Oscar Nicodemus built his new building, which is the one that's there now. It's vacant currently, but was later sold out to the Baldwins, Vance Baldwin and his family, and it was operated as the Wadsworth Oil Company. And this, being a relatively newer thing, probably came under their ownership rather than Mr. Nicodemus. Mr. Nicodemus, of course, we saw his name on the thermometer that is in need of restoration. But people continuously tease me when I get back from auctions, well, how many yardsticks and fly swatters did you buy today? But again, it helps pinpoint businesses or people in a certain area at a certain time. Also, some are very interesting. One I did not bring today, just because I couldn't put my hand on it quickly enough, from a local business. the part that you swat the fly with has the outline of a fly on it, molded into the plastic.
Oh, my heavens.
And the legend at the top of it, in the plastic, is "Fight Polio," which, of course, was from another era entirely.
Exactly. Okay. Shall we move on to some pictures?
All right.
Okay.
Well, people did find other things to do, as with the dawning of this century. They did find other ways to pass their time. And this photograph is from the Wadsworth Soapbox Derby. The first United
Wadsworth
States,
Soapbox.
yes, the first United States Soapbox Derby, the nationwide Soapbox Derby, was in 1934 and was actually held in Dayton, Ohio, rather than Akron, where we know it. And the second one in 1935 was held on the Talmadge Hill. And it was not until 1936, this year, that Derby Downs, which we're familiar with, came into usage. And in that year, 1936, the Wadsworth News newspaper, which later merged with the Banner Press to form the News Banner, and the Hayes Arnold automobile dealership, the Chevrolet dealership, got together to sponsor this race in Wadsworth, with the winner going on to represent Wadsworth in the Akron or National Soapbox Derby, the All-American Soapbox Derby, as we call it today. Now, there had been some problems in 1935 with people trying to use fabricated parts and special things to give them an edge in the contest. So the Derby officials decreed that no more than $10 could be spent in the construction of the racer,
that's how they
including all of the parts that went into it, and the driver had to do all of the work himself. And these first races in Wadsworth were held down Injector Hill, between the Injector and the Ohio Match Company. And this photograph is taken at the crest of the hill, showing the winner of the Wadsworth Derby, who is Donald Zabinden, who was 13 years old at the time, and he's seated in his racer, which is, believe it or not, red. I read that.
How did you know
It's a wooden frame, and stretched over it are old, there was some controversy, I showed this to a couple of gentlemen yesterday, as to what the covering
fabric, yeah.
would be. And one person thought maybe it'd be similar to an airplane fabric, and someone else thought perhaps it was metal. But in speaking with Mr. Zabinden, who now lives in Akron, he told me that they were flour sacks that were soaked in glue and then stretched across the framework and allowed to dry so that they would pool tight. And he was the winner of this race and was presented with a trophy, which was named in honor of the president of the Chevrolet Motor Company at that time, and had the opportunity to represent Wadsworth in the race. Unfortunately, there was a malfunction in his car. One of the gears broke, and he had a collision or an accident, and fortunately was not hurt, but it ended his time in the race. Standing around him are E.W. Arnold and Lauren Hayes, who were the owners of the firm of Hayes Arnold, and Andy Cooper, who was the editor of the Wadsworth News. And Mr. Cooper had a young boy of his own who was just about 8 years old, and just a few weeks before this picture was taken, the little boy came down with a sore throat. And of course they took him to the doctor, and the doctor was unable to diagnose it and referred them to another doctor who determined that it was a very, very rare form of leukemia, which was untreatable. And within days the little boy was dead. And so it must have been a day of mixed emotions for Mr. Cooper, who was proud that his newspaper was taking part in this, and to see all the young people so happy but thinking of his own lost child. And on the right-hand side is Dave Straighton, Jr., who was representing the American Legion. And there is a little bit of talk now that possibly this might be started again in Wadsworth, because the local derby runs continued in Wadsworth until the 1960s. In later years, they were held on Boyer Street rather than Injector Hill. But there's some consideration being given to perhaps sponsoring those races again in Wadsworth. In 1964, there were still 14 contestants involved in that race.
Of course, the Knox family is here in Wadsworth is really big.
Exactly. They were just written up quite recently for their participation in that. Now, of course, the Ohio companies had annual picnics for their employees so that they could get out and enjoy the warm weather. And this is a picture of the 1941 picnic at Rex Lake, of the Ohio Injector Company. Over 2,000 people attended.
Oh, my.
And these men in the back, the employees of the Injector Company, are receiving their 20-year pins from Executive Vice President and Superintendent Irvin Young and Vice President P.M. Arnall. And from left to right, they decided that the women played such an important role in their husband working and being successful in their job that they presented all of the wives with flowers and had them pin the 20-year pin on their husband. Now, I suppose nowadays some of those roles would be reversed and the husbands would be pinning them on. But the couples that we see from the left to right are Mr. and Mrs. James McDermott, Mr. and Mrs. Mike Christofoli, Mr. and Mrs. Earl Weldy, Mr. and Mrs. Olin Tryon, Mr. and Mrs. Frank Dunn. And also Bert Kunkler and his wife were present and received a pin in recognition for the service that he had done, but they were out of the picture at that time.
Where's Rex Lake? Should I have not asked that? Because I don't even I haven't a clue.
I've been there and I don't know.
Okay. Well, I'll pretend I didn't ask that.
Thank you. And just so the young people wouldn't feel left out, they had a beauty contest. And in fact, many of the early Miss Wadsworth contestants were not chosen from the community at large, but rather were what you might call private contests held within the match or the injector. And these beauty contestants are Wanda Wheeler and Agnes Seifert and Eleanor Sears. They were participating in that contest at that picnic.
Well, they look like they're having a good time. Okay.
Well, this one's starting to come loose. But in 1939, at the height of the Depression, there was not much that the young people could do. They didn't have the money to afford themselves much entertainment. So when the William Crooks, which was an engine from the Northern Pacific Railroad, came through Wadsworth, it caused quite a bit of excitement, and the schools were let out for the afternoon so the children could go to the depot. This was the first engine to operate west of the mountains in 1861 and had been completely refitted. It was no longer wood burning at this time and was on its way from Chicago to the World's Fair in New York in 1939 when it made this stop in Wadsworth. And it was quite an historic event.
There's quite a crowd of people around it.
And later that year, Wadsworth had another treat when Admiral Byrd's snow cruiser stopped in Wadsworth on its way to Antarctica. Admiral Byrd was making another expedition to the South Pole, and this craft had been fabricated in Chicago and was on its way to Boston, where it would be loaded on board ship and transported to the South Pole. And as it was passing through Wadsworth, you have to remember that at that time, Broad Street and College Street were Route 224. It was a federal route. It was part of what was called the Ben Franklin Highway. And so this was a main route through the center of town. And when they came to Wadsworth, the crew decided they wanted to stop and have lunch. So it was a perfect opportunity for Wadsworth people to come down and view this close up, because there had been quite a bit of write-up about it in the paper. And you can see how small these men look in proportion to this. Of course, the tires were made by Goodyear. And now, just as an aside, in the background, we just talked a little bit ago about Good and Bixler undertaking. You can see Good and Bixler there with the hearse alongside it. And that was you went in their furniture store or for their undertaking. They actually conducted funerals from a house on the corner of Pardee and College Street. And next to it was the Siffords station. And these buildings were all replaced by Knapp's Firestone and Tony's on the Square now. But this is a booklet that was put out when the snow cruiser came through Wadsworth. And as you can see by this drawing on the front cover, it was designed to carry a plane on the deck of it so that they could make side trips down there, though the plane wasn't with it when it came through Wadsworth.
And did you find these two items separately? You had found the picture one place and then this information?
Yes, yes. The two
putting
came
it all together.
That was one. The brochure was sent to the newspaper at that time for publicity purposes. There was quite a bit of publicity that was put out because of Goodyear and the other companies that were involved in it. And I believe they've got a sketch in there of the inside. to show
Oh, I see the sleeping
how
and
roomy
the...
it was. They note back here, room for spare tires, food storage. They could carry food for a year for a 6-man crew. Retractable tires that could be pulled up if they had to glide across. Double-deck bunks, the fuel tanks. There's a galley and a dark room for their photographic room, chart work, engine room, and so forth.
Oh, my heavens.
So it was a wonderful opportunity for Wadsworth people to view something like that. Unfortunately, as well designed as it was, once it got down to the South Pole, it didn't operate as designed, and it sunk in the snow and was used very little, and as far as anyone knows, it's still down there. There have been some crews or some missions in recent years that have attempted to locate it, but as far as we know, it's still down there.
Oh, my heavens.
Now, this is a picture of the opening day of the Grandview Pool, and wanting to provide a place for young people to go and swim away from the swimming holes that had proved dangerous. There were quite a few drownings in the early part of this century in these old swimming holes down at the brick and tile yards and in the match company and some of the other areas, and at the old salt company works. So the people thought that it would be a good idea to have a pool, but no, that's about all they could decide on. They couldn't decide on how it was to be built or the design of it or where it was to be placed or how it was to be financed. And a number of different locations were considered, including the Lucas Grove down off of East Street, areas up at the end of Fair Lawn, an area not too far from the present, it was the Spring Hill Farm, which would be not too far from the present Steiner Center, which is a strange coincidence. But after much wrangling, it was decided to build it on the land that was donated to the city by the Ohio Match Company. The Ohio Match Company had donated 38 acres to the city, 7.5 acres of which was to be used by the school for the building of a stadium, a football stadium, and the rest was to be reserved for parkland. And they came up with a wonderful concept for a swimming pool, and I don't have a drawing with me this morning, but it was a wall-less swimming pool. It would be completely in-ground with a 20-foot sand beach all around.
Oh, my heavens.
So that it would appear to be a natural beach. In the center was a large fountain that came out of the middle of it that was lighted, and under the water was an observation booth so that the lifeguards could go down underwater and watch for people on the bottom. It was lighted by colored lights. They could have colored light shows and also play music to accompany the lights and the fountain and all of this. But again, the city couldn't decide on what they wanted to do. And by the time they did decide, it ended up costing about 3 times as much as it would have.
Sure.
Now, this was built under a WPA grant in part, and was built by, actually opened on Memorial Day 1942. And this is a picture of the crowd that had gathered there. It was an above-ground pool, for those who don't remember it. You would enter from the ground floor off of Grandview, and there was a lobby area and the desk where you'd pay your fee, and then the girls' locker rooms were to the left and the boys' locker rooms to the right, and you would change and come upstairs at the opposite end of the pool and into the water itself. So that's why people seem so close to the roof line of the house.
Oh, I didn't never realize that. Okay. Oh, here we have some happy swimmers.
Well, these are the
sunbathers.
The picture that we just saw was from the opening in 1942, as I said, Memorial Day, where they had over 1,700 people come in the first 5 days. This picture is of the lifeguards in 1944, when the pool was preparing to open for its 3rd season. You notice the pool isn't filled yet.
Yeah.
So they're rather precariously perched on the end of that diving board. And the lifeguards included Bert Fidian on the left, and Dolores Way, and Dale Saunders, and John Kelly. And they were the lifeguards for that year. And of course, the recreation department has grown tremendously in Wadsworth. It originally began also as a WPA project, and there were some doubts as to whether or not it might continue after those funds were lost. They went through an awful lot of administrators in its first few years, and it wasn't really until Jack Goltz came to the recreation department and eventually became its head that there was some stability and that he was able to initiate a lot of new programs and projects. And this is one of the summer projects, which I would guess from the looks of it would probably be late 50s or early 60s, and boys practicing with a football and generally having fun. And the man standing next to them is known to a lot of Wadsworth people as Andy Orris, who in his high school days was quite an athlete and was later a counselor here at the high school for many years prior to his retirement. He later retired to Florida, where he passed away several years ago.
Okay. Very nice. And from the still pictures, we have some moving pictures.
Yes, we do. One of the things that people look forward to here in Wadsworth every summer is the Wadsworth Week Parade. And these carnivals originally began as an activity of the American Legion and were operated by them through the Second World War and, in fact, through the 50s. And it wasn't until the JCs later took them over and reorganized them as the Blue Tip Festival that they came into being as we know them today. In the earlier years, the parade was not the major feature. The carnival aspect of it was, the rides and the concessions. And it wasn't until recently that they've done such a tremendous job of building the parade up. The Wadsworth was in danger of losing any type of celebration at all because the older hands who had had charge of it were not able to continue, and there was just really no one there to take the reins until the JCs stepped in. And then, of course, when the JCs disbanded several years ago, again, it was up in the air, and luckily people did come forward and are able to provide us with the spectacle that we have today. The carnivals were originally held at Memorial Park, and after the First World War, after that was developed. Memorial Park, we'll talk about that a little more later. They were held at Memorial Park, but then for the sesquicentennial, 150th anniversary of Wadsworth in 1964, the entire carnival was moved to the downtown area, to Main Street, and the square was closed off, and that's where the carnival was held. And it was operated there for several years before being moved to the high school, and it was held in the backyard of the high school here. And that was in the later 60s. And then in the early 70s, it was moved down to Isham School and was held back there. And then in the middle 70s, thereabouts, it was transferred back to Memorial Park, which, of course, is where it is now.
Oh, I had no idea it had taken that route.
It had moved around quite a bit, and a lot of different, but you always have your standard, your cotton candy and your candied apples and your Ferris wheel, and there are some people who go down just to do that, and they take one walk around and look at things and then go home. They're satisfied for a year that it's in good hands rather than avail themselves of the different things that are down there. And of course, in the earlier years, they had large merchant tents, almost like circus tents, but not that high. And all of the merchants in the community would participate and set up displays and have giveaways and drawings. And unfortunately, in recent years, that's dwindled down to nothing. And the Miss Wadsworth contest always operated as an important part of that. And now that's operated separately, but in conjunction with it. But we have a film of the sesquicentennial celebration in 1964. And these are people lining the streets along Broad Street in front of what is now the Marathon Station. At that time it was the Standard Oil Station, awaiting the start of the parade. You notice the ladies in their old bonnets because people at that time were encouraged to dress up in keeping with the celebration, the idea of the anniversary. There are even some people in the crowd with hoop skirts and top hats.
And here it is.
You see the midway down there in the middle of Main Street. You can pick out the buildings, Allen and Hartzell and the junior high school. Of course, looking up High Street when there was still a park in High Street, and the visitors' cabin in the Broad Street Park.
All the cotton candy.
People walking along the midway. Tremendous crowd. See, the world's smallest man. I remember that. We saw Mr. Police there. He was always selling tickets on the car. Always.
Who took this footage?
This was taken by Associated Films, which was a professional company from Akron. which had made films of Wadsworth in the 1920s and 30s and 40s.
I think that Wadsworth is quite lucky that we have such beautiful park system available to all of us for picnics or whatever.
Well, I think so also, and I think we're fortunate that the match company donated the memorial park to us. Last time we were together, we had an opportunity to visit Durling Park and hear a little bit of the history behind that and see that the day we visited, it was still in use.
In use, yes.
And Memorial Park, of course, is still used, as is Valley View and Bird Street Park. And these are available to all the public to rent out for reunions or any type of activity they want, or just to wander down and enjoy the foliage. The Memorial Park, of course, is a memorial to our veterans of the Second World War and the Korean War, but it can take in all of the men and women who have served our country. And I think that we need to stress again that as people visit our parks, that they are a gift to us from those who've gone before us, and that they ought to be respected and preserved. And if people this summer are walking down this fall through the Memorial Park and enjoying the beauty, that they might take a minute and stop at the monument to the soldiers who gave their lives within the Second World War and the Korean War.
And here's a picture you brought of the...
That's one that we'd seen previously. Shortly after the magnolias were planted there was a magnolia tree planted representing each man who died in service to his country. And unfortunately, in recent years, people who ice skate on the ponds during the wintertime have seen fit to break the branches down off the trees and use them for firewood. But especially now when our minds are on the Middle East, whether we have friends and relatives there or not, I'm sure our hearts are with all of these young people. Something that struck me in the recent news coverage was the fact that so little from home is allowed into the servicemen. Their letters are all censored. They're not allowed to receive cigarettes or a lot of other things that our hosts, the Saudi Arabians, feel are inappropriate or immoral. It's not in keeping with their religion. And in fact, they're not able to practice their religion, be it Christianity or Judaism, freely because of the restrictions of that country. But one thing that they do appreciate is mail from home. In that sweltering heat, there's not a lot they can do but sit. And we've seen on the news and in the paper, in fact, in Sunday's paper, they had a list of all the different addresses where you could write to servicemen who would appreciate mail from home. And I'm sure our Veterans Administration and our local veterans group would be more than happy to help people learn how to just write a letter to a serviceman, maybe someone who has no family. In a situation like that, I don't think you can be remembered too much.
I agree. Well, thank you, David, very much for coming and sharing with us the wonderful things here that people kept the heat at bay.
I'll loan you a fly swatter.
I could use one. Thank you.